What's up, everybody? It's Michael or Penguinos007 here today for another reaction video with my good friend Nither.
Hey.
And we have today a requested video. And the guy's been super patient. The username's Trev Destroyer. He's been waiting for this video, but then they're like, let's upload all at once. So we have when the 101st Airborne saved friend and foe.
Morning of June the 6th, 1944, and 20-year-old Corporal Robert Wright is preparing to jump from his Z-47. Wright is in the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, which have been assigned to the 101st Airborne. He's headed for Drop Zone D, one of the most southerly drop zones for the 101st Airborne in Normandy on D-Day, deep into German territory. He lands in a field just 600 yards north of a small French village called Angeville-au-Plain. About 3 a.m. Wright enters the village. It's strangely quiet, but everyone knows the Germans are close. However, Robert is not interested in the conflict as he's a medic. He immediately identifies the 700-year-old village church as an ideal aid station, puts a red cross on the door, and gets inside to prepare. At around the same time, a 19-year-old private, Kenneth Moore, is inside his C-47 called the Round Trip.
Round
The plane
Trip.
is too low, and the parachute barely has time to open. The Germans have flooded the fields, and this helps cushion the fall as Moore lands heavily. Moore is also a medic and treats several Americans as his unit heads to the village. Seeing the red cross on the church door, Bob Wright and Kent Moore meet up inside shortly after 3 a.m., and the start of an incredible episode in the history of Normandy begins. The two men arrange the pews into emergency beds, and the casualties start to arrive. Initially, it's injuries from the parachute drop, but around 6 a.m., the battle becomes intense, and soldiers requiring help are coming in increasing numbers.
They look like zombies.
Bob and Ken do what they can to treat and comfort the injured coming in from the fields surrounding the village. The 101st Airborne and the 6th German Parachute Regiment hold different parts of the village, and the battle is changing quickly. The young medics have no idea who controls the ground outside the church, but hearing the battle, they decide to venture out and look for more casualties. Both men went out on occasion, but Wright had more medical training and so more often stayed in the church and tended to the injured. When looking for casualties, the men didn't distinguish between American or German. Both were treated equally. Putting an old farm cart to use, they would bring in whoever they could find. Sometimes they had to drag soldiers on parachute silk to the cart if the ground was rough. Both sides saw what these brave young medics were doing. And whenever and wherever they appeared, the shooting would halt, so they could pass. Their only protection was the red cross on their armband, and in this battle, both the Americans and the Germans respected that medics should not be hit. The
Yeah.
Germans, seeing the work of the two young men, started bringing
The
in
white
their
mage.
own men that needed help. Robert and Ken treated them all. Ken said, they were young men, just like us, just wearing different uniforms. More soldiers needing medical assistance started coming in, and with both sides in the church, Robert was getting nervous. He made the rule that everyone had to be unarmed and leave any weapons at the door of the church before entering, yelling at anyone and enforcing the rule regardless of rank or side, so that it didn't, as Ken would later say, turn into Dodge City. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and in rushed a German soldier, brandishing a raised machine gun and prepared to use it. There was a tense silence as the Germans slowly took in the situation. After what must have seemed like an age, and much to everyone's relief, he slowly lowered the weapon, made the sign of the cross, and left. Wright and Moore were running low on supplies now. They were getting close
I
to
didn't see the
empty.
fucking thing.
There were now so many men in the church
I
that
didn't see
the
the
pews
box.
Too
were
religious.
too few to accommodate
Sacred
all
ground.
the injured, and the floor had to be used too. Some of the more gravely injured were laid closer to the church altar. The men were getting tired. Mortars and artillery were rocking the ancient church, which was now a sanctuary for a significant number of men. The two brave medics were doing their best to keep the men calm, giving them water and treatment where they could. A mortar landed on the roof, causing plaster and stone to fall down. A chunk of the roof caught Kenneth on the side of the head, but he carried on. Bob later quipped that it really woke Ken
Why'd you
up.
take off your helmet?
Another mortar round came in, through the window this time.
That's what it looks like?
By some miracle, it was
A small one.
faulty and didn't explode. If it had
Jesus.
not been a dud, the whole place would have been destroyed.
Hand of God,
Bob
man.
picked up the mortar round and threw it out the window. Early in the morning, one day after they had first entered the church, the Germans were making ground. An American officer hurriedly entered the church and offered Morin Wright to leave with the American forces. Both men declined and decided to stay, even though they would soon be in German hands. The officer left, and shortly after, the Germans pushed the 101st Airborne back and out of the village. A German officer came to inspect the church and the situation. Bob made no exceptions to his rule and forced the officer and his men to leave their arms at the church door. The German asked if the two medics needed any help and thanked them for relieving some of the work from the German medics, and left. The American forces started arriving in force from Utah Beach, and the battle for Angerville-au-Plain was back underway. Another German burst in. This time, he wouldn't leave his weapon at the door, and an argument ensued with the medics. Eventually, even this belligerent German could not defeat Wright's force of will, and he agreed reluctantly to leave his gun outside. When Bob tried to treat his injuries, the German refused, saying, "You Americans don't know what you're doing. I'm only going to be taken care of by German medics when they retake the village." But they never did. Bob and Ken's will overcame any objections, and eventually the German allowed himself to be treated by the Americans. The tower was still being rocked as mortars were being fired. In a bizarre incident, at this point, two German soldiers appeared from the tower above into the main church with their hands in the air. They had been there all the time since Bob and Ken had arrived. The Germans were very young and had been too afraid to come down before. The shelling had flushed them out, and now they offered to join in and help the medics. On the afternoon of June the 7th, the American forces from Utah Beach arrived in force. As they came into the village, a Sherman started firing at the church. Robert wasn't going to let that happen. He rushed outside towards the tank and shouted that the church was a station for the injured. Later, a lieutenant came to the medics and asked to use the church steeple as an observation post. The young corporal politely refused the lieutenant's request. Ken Moore started to help move the wounded to transports and went with them to the beaches. Bob Wright stayed behind and even treated some of the locals that had been injured. 3 days after he first entered, Corporal Robert Wright took one long last look around the empty church.
Chromebook boots up fast, like as fast.
You ruined a perfectly good moment.
Yeah. I like war stories. Ah, yes. I don't care, you're my superiors.
And left.
Fucking peasants.
The church still stands today. There is a monument to the
the
heroic
superiors,
actions
not
of the
peasants.
two young medics, as well as a stained glass window dedicated to Bob Wright and Ken Moore. One of the more poignant reminders of that day are the pews that still bear the stains of the action on those days. Ken Moore passed away aged 90 in 2014, and Bob Wright in 2013 aged 89. Bob wanted to be buried in the grounds of the church. Unfortunately, due to bureaucracy, that was next to impossible. However, even in death, Bob's will was not to be denied. Some of his ashes were somehow brought into France and placed in the ground in the churchyard, where a simple plaque marked REW for Bob's initials marks the place where
Screw the bureaucracy.
returned. If you'd like to hear more on this story, we thoroughly recommend the great book Angels of Mercy by Paul Woodidge. You can also check out Paul's expertly informative YouTube channel. We visited the church while researching this video. It's a short drive from Utah Beach, and you should definitely visit if you are in the area. Please also consider becoming a patron to support us in making more videos like this.
It's pretty good. Oh. So I think one of my favorite things from it was World War I. Remember Christmas?
Yeah.
That was a pretty cool.
The 24-hour.
Peace. They played soccer, exchanged gifts.
Yeah.
The war will be over by Christmas. We didn't say which Christmas.
Like, okay, guys, we have to get away. We'll give you a 10-minute break until we fight again or something.
Yeah.
And
then I think my favorite act of God in history was when I think the British were looting and burning down the Capitol.
Poland?
No, the U.S. Capitol.
Oh, way back. Okay.
Way back. Oh,
When they burnt the White House the first time, I think.
Yeah. So the only building that stood was the post office. But when they were burning everything down, right? A freaking tornado came through and wiped them out, and then a hurricane came through and put out all the fires. If that is not the hand of God, I don't know what is.
Thank you.
Hurricane!
Tornado.
Whoosh!
This Jeanette gives you a thumbs up.
What's your favorite story from history?
History?
You got a favorite? You got a favorite story that like, or hand of God?
I don't know about those two. I will have to think about.
Alright. So,
Okay. Got it.
anyways, guys, thank you guys for watching this video. If you like this video, and if you have any more requests, like Trev Destroyer, put them down in the description below. Comments, not the description. We are getting around to them. I have my list right here of the reactions that I'm going to be doing. But anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.